Welcome to My Renovation Nation, brought to you by Red Maples, a real estate performance advisory service for small multifamily real estate investors. I'm Nathan Bush. In each show, I share with you lessons I've learned from my friends, mentors, and personal journey in real estate. I've designed each show to inspire, motivate, and equip you for your own investing path. In today's episode, I'm going to cover collecting rent. I'm going to plug into the money mindset today and actually collect some rent. And remember, if you're watching live, drop some questions in the comments and I'll address as many as I can throughout the show. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more actionable insights. Visit www.nathanbushmba.com for free resources to help you grow your real estate business. And now, on to the show. What is up, guys? Welcome to Mind Renovation Nation. We're going to talk today all about collecting rent. If you are looking to collect rent in Missouri and you've struggled to collect rent from your current tenants or previous tenants, today's show is going to be helpful for you. Hopefully it's educational, but more importantly, I hope it's entertaining. And I could share with you some examples and real life stories of collecting rent from tenants. So hold tight in today's show if you guys are super excited about learning all about collecting rent. Now, I did this show not just to collect rent, but I did this show around the concept of the money mindset. So I've done a number of different shows. I did one on collecting rent with love, and I did one on the money mindset. I recommend go back and watch both of those shows if you haven't done so. This show today is going to be tying those two applications directly together to help you become even more profitable and to make significantly more money in real estate investing. All right. So a number of years ago, I used to collect rent for a large apartment community. And when I started with them, they were like $50,000, $60,000 in arrears on a monthly basis. They had significant amount of money that was outstanding to them that the tenants had owed. And where I learned to collect rent was at this apartment community. This was the type of community where the neighborhood was a little bit more difficult and challenging. I think we busted 3 heroin rings that ran through the apartment community at the time I was there collecting rent. So that tells you the clientele that we were typically working with at this apartment community. It was rough. It was knocking on doors, posting notices on the apartments, talking one-on-one and having conversations with people who owed balances. This was a rough time in my career trying to learn how to collect rent. But there's no better way to learn to do it than belly to belly, face to face with other human beings, because what you learn is that you can't really be overly aggressive in a situation where somebody owes you money, that you could end up putting somebody in an emotional state that could hurt you. And so I've always carried those thoughts with me, because during that time frame, we were able to clean up the collections significantly. We took collections from being that far outstanding on 725 apartments, let's say, and we reduced it to under 2% delinquency in just 9 months time frame. So how did I do that? Well, today's show, I'm going to give you some examples and tools and resources of what I did to help clean up collections at a previous apartment community, but we're also going to talk about past residents. So it's one thing to be able to collect rent from tenants that are currently living in your apartments, but it's another thing to be able to collect the money once a tenant moves out. And so there's some things that you can do in your process that will help you. Now, can you collect 100% of the past due rents? I'll leave that up to you. Can you collect 100% of the current rents from tenants? Again, I'll leave that up to you. But what you can do is set yourself up in a position where it's more helpful and advantageous for you to be able to collect rent. And so that's what we're going to talk about in today's show. We're going to talk all about how to collect that rent. Now, I know what you might be thinking right now. You might be thinking, well, I'm not that good with numbers. Or maybe you're thinking that you don't have the time to collect rent and chase your money down, and you're not going to go after bad money. And that might be you as well. And so you don't put a lot of effort into this. Or maybe you're thinking that money's not everything. And so you're doing perfectly fine. You don't have to put that much effort into life, and good for you. If you don't need the money and it's not important to you to be able to chase down your rents, there's nothing I'm going to do today to be able to convince you to help you go after the money that's owed to you. Okay, so here's the thing. I want you to think about things from a sales and marketing perspective, from a business perspective to begin with on today's show, okay? I want you to think about the thought process that marketing happens all the way up until the point when somebody owes you money. If you can get this mindset down, then you can begin to understand that there was a process that took place long before you were collecting, and it led you all the way to the part of you collecting the money that's owed to your organization. So you got to separate out collections from sales and marketing. You are literally marketing all the way till the point when somebody owes you money, and then you turn into a collector. So it's interesting because how many people do you know that have a collections mentality that when it's time to collect money, their personality changes from sales and marketing, and they can't keep it together while they're in the collections phase? What you have to understand is the same person that you were when you were selling the opportunity to somebody, when you were selling the home, when you were selling the apartment to them, that is the same person that you have to be whenever you go to collect from them. Guys, I learned this the hard way. I learned because I started in the collections aspect. I started in the apartment industry collecting rent, not in leasing. And so I learned it backwards. And so that's what I'm hoping that you can get from today's show, is that you can take the lessons learned from working this process backwards and then take it and apply it to your marketing and even your acquisitions in your when you're trying to acquire more doors. It is really important that you get this concept down, that you are marketing all the way up until the time that it transitions into the collections period. And so there's marketing and collections, and there's nothing else. There is no such thing as selling. Selling is the entire process. It's from the beginning of the initial contact with somebody all the way until they've given you money and referrals and testimonials down the road. Okay. So here's what you want to think about from a collection standpoint. How do I utilize this as an opportunity to gain testimonials and referrals from the person sitting across from me? Because if you can look at every collection interaction as an opportunity to grow and expand your rental portfolio, your real estate, you're going to be in a healthier position mentally to work through these challenges with the resident. And so we have to start from this perspective. We got to start from the right understanding of where we're at in the process, in the relationship with this person. See, the challenges that I've found also is that a lot of people will wait to start to collect rent from somebody till the relationship has already deteriorated. And if you're waiting too long to start the collections process of asking for the money for the services that you've rendered, then you're putting distance in the relationship, and it's going to be that much harder emotionally to get the person on the other side to open their checkbook and give you money. So you can't wait 2, 3, 4 months before you start your collections process, where the person falls so far behind, the relationship can never be restored. And that's what I want you to think about, is we're talking about these different tools and tactics in order to be able to help you collect more rent. Okay. If you guys are watching online right now, do you have a tenant that owes you money? Do you have balances that are outstanding? What is the biggest balance that somebody's ever owed you? Throw it in the chat and the communication. I'd be interested to see what you guys say while you're watching online today. All right, let's jump into the concepts. We understand the point that we're at. All right, so we talked about how if you're rich, it's okay. But if they owe you money, they owe you money. It's part of the buying process with you, and you're actually doing somebody a disservice if you don't collect the money that's owed. So let's talk about one of the greatest ways in collections to be able to collect from somebody, and that is this mindset of scarcity versus abundance. Scarcity versus abundance, okay? So why do I talk about scarcity and abundance whenever I'm talking about the right mindset to be able to collect from a tenant? So when you're building wealth, you have an abundant mindset. When you're working through to become wealthy, You have a scarce mindset. Everything is scarce. And so you have to understand the mindset that the tenant is in when you're having that conversation. They don't live in a land of abundance if they owe you money. They're living in scarcity. It's your job to help open their mindset from scarcity to abundance if you want to get them to be able to pay you. When you're having the conversation with them, you cannot allow the person on the other side of the conversation to remain in their scarce mindset. You need to help them start thinking through options and to show them that what's available and what abundance is actually out there. It is actually your responsibility to give the tenant some hope, because if you don't give them hope, where is it going to come from? Okay. So let's start at the beginning of the leasing process and talk about abundance and how this plays into collections throughout the entire business practice and model. Okay. So let's go. When you're leasing a property, how many of you guys on your application ask for references? How many of you guys on your application verify who their caseworker is if it's Section 8 so that you know it and have it readily available? How many of you guys ensure when people are applying with you that you have a valid supervisor's phone number at work or have a valid emergency contact on the application? Because these are areas when it comes time for collections that will significantly help you be able to lean into to get a hold of somebody who's not willing to have the conversations with you anymore, if they believe that it's so scarce and things are imminent. Once you get on the phone with the person, you want to become the type of person that they want to call and have a conversation with against, because you're sharing abundance with them. You're talking to them, talking them through the different options that they have so that they can collect rent. I'll give you a perfect example of a story. I was working with a lady who was a month behind on her rent because we didn't let them get very far. And we were getting ready to file an eviction on this person. And they owed me, let's say, $725 still in outstanding rent. Okay. So I write up a promissory note and I tell them, in good faith, I want you to put down some money. I can't go with zero. You've got to have something. You've got to have some money in order for me to write up a promissory arrangement that I'm not going to file an eviction in this situation. It's to help you. It's more so that you know that you made the commitment than it is for me. So I get them to give me some money. They say, well, I don't have any money. I say, you have some money. You've got to eat. You've got to put gas in your vehicle. You've got to be able to get to work. So how are you going to do those things if you don't have any money at all? And the person says to me, well, I can maybe do $5. I say, can you do 10? Well, if you can do 10, can you do 20? And I find a good faith payment for them to put down towards the amount. Then we write up the promissory arrangement. After we wrote up the promissory arrangement, I had a quick conversation with them. And I said, do you realize that your rent has the most expensive late fees out of all of your other bills? Just think about it. I'm not just saying this because I want you to pay your rent to me. I'm saying this because I want to genuinely help you get this straightened out so you don't have to fall behind in the future on any of these bills. The first and most important bill that you pay in your entire life is your rent bill. Why? Because it has the highest late fees. And these late fees can be extremely expensive. If you think about 10% of $725, that's an extra $72. That's almost the cost of an entire other bill, like a water bill, or in some cases, that's the same cost as a gas bill. And so it's better to have a 10% charge on a gas bill or a water bill than it is to have a $72 charge, 10% fee on your rent bill. Do you see how expensive that gets? Now, when I framed it like this, I start to help them realize where the money's coming from. Again, we're talking about right now, just in the conversation, when you're collecting, the ability to see scarcity versus abundance. Number one, I showed them abundance by showing them where they could get the money, that they could pull money and come up with money right now if they had to, before they even signed the promissory arrangement. So that opens the mindset for them to be able to pay me. The second thing that I did was I showed them that money wasn't scarce. It just needs to be reorganized in their budgets. Most people that owe money, that are living in a poverty mindset, don't know where their abundance is. They're walking past their abundance to go after the lack that they have in their life. They're downtrodden. They're in poverty. They don't have the money right now. They're dealing with all kinds of different credit issues inside their life, collectors, a lot of different people talking to them. And by you simply taking the time to share abundance with them, guys, it's a game changer. It changes the face of the relationship. So you got to shift from scarcity mindset to an abundance mindset. The next thing we've got to talk about is investment over expenses. Okay, so this one is a little bit more complicated in your money mindset when you're talking about collecting rent. And we just want to walk through this process of understanding this again. Okay, so expenditures is a liability. Anytime that you pay something with cash, you are losing the ability to use that cash on something else, i.e., you're foregoing the ability to invest that cash and make a rate of return. So every time you spend money, it's actually costing you the opportunity to earn interest. That's called debt. Okay, so every expense is actually a liability in somebody's life. Investments is assets, is the second thing on my list, right? In this flow or this framework of the money mindset. And so an investment as an asset is incredibly important to understand. When you invest in something, an asset is something that pays you back or gives you more money. So how will the purchase improve their life when they are buying the apartment is the thought process that a marketer or leasing person, a salesperson has, right? How will the purchase improve their life? We have to remind them of these things in the conversation when it really in terms that they can understand and relate to when you're having the conversation, because you're not talking to somebody that's educated about assets, liabilities, income, expenses, and all this. And so your mindset is in a healthy place, but their mindset is not in a healthy place to be able to have a conversation about expenses and liabilities and forego money. But what they are in a position to understand is how they can benefit their life by doing the right things, and how not doing the right things leads to a more troublesome or a more burdensome life for them. Explain. Let me give you a perfect example of this. So I had a conversation with this lady one time. We'll call her name Chris. Okay. Chris was having difficulty because she had two people that were living inside the home. And then one of those people who was helping to pay the rent left. And so she was left with the burden of having to pay the rent on her own. She was 4 months into her lease, which said that she still had a long way to go to get to the 12 months to the end of her lease before she could put in her notice, move out without penalty, or not have to pay 2 times the rent in order to break her lease to get out of the lease, plus her current month's rent. So this was a challenge for Chris. And when I was working with Chris, I had a conversation with her about how every time she chooses to spend her money, whether it's on the rent or whether it's on some other expense, a food item, a toy for her kid, gas in her vehicle, every time she makes a cost to spend money in one area, she's costing herself the ability right now to be able to spend money in the other area. So prioritizing your expenses. Sit down with a piece of paper. Don't do this right now. We don't have time on this phone call to be able to do this. But sit down, Chris, with a piece of paper and write out all of your expenses and write out what's most important to you in your life. Is having a home most important to you in your life? And every time you spend money in the right area of your life that's important to you, it builds value for you long term. And every time you spend $1 in an area that's not important to you, it takes value away from you long term. And so if you want to improve your credit, You don't want to end up in a bad situation, even though you lost the other person who was paying you money. You have to really prioritize what's important and what is going to do the most damage to your credit and your long-term future. You really have to think about these things so that your rent can get paid correctly and you don't end up losing your home, which I know that those things are important to you. I know that having a home and a place to put your head long-term is important to you. And I know it's important to you that you don't want to have to pay double deposits and other things in the future in order to be able to get into apartments because your credit is so poor. You did such a good job moving into this apartment and you had such great credit to begin with. I don't want all of that to be ruined for you just because you had a bad partner or a bad relationship. Don't let that person be a liability to you. And so you have to think through these things when you're having the conversation. You got to be able to explain to them the money mindset when you're collecting in a proper way. You know, it's interesting. I'll really help you to understand this if we could just talk for a second about somebody who is selling, right? And you've gotten this person all the way to the point where you've quoted price, and now it's time to get money from them. There's something that's keeping them from giving you the money. They've prioritized, they've made something an asset in their life, and they're looking at your service like it's a liability. And you've got to make your service, your home or apartment, the asset for them and make everything else the liability that's costing them. And then they'll gladly hand you over their credit card or their cash that they have in order to be able to make that purchase. You've got to build value in the reason that they're giving you the money right now today. Okay? All right. Let's talk about the next step in the money mindset. Money is not the goal. Money is a means to an end. Okay. What do I mean by this, and why is this so important for this conversation today? The Bible says in Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. If you come across to the tenant while they're living with you or after they're living with you, that the only thing you care about is the money, they're going to see that and feel that. The same is true when you're sitting in a sales conversation with somebody. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. If they feel that you love the money more than you care about them as a person, they're never going to give you the money. They're never going to give you the money. And so it's imperative and important that you understand from a wealth mindset that money is not the goal. Money is the means to an end for you. However, caring about the person is the goal. And so if you can help them feel that there's no love of money there, that you're not trying to take their money from them, you're trying to help them, even though there's money involved, that you're trying to care about them by them doing the right things with their money, then guess what ends up happening? It's more focused on them than it is focused on you. And so the transaction can take place. But most of the time, the challenge that I see is that the landlord leads with the money. That's all they want to talk about with the tenant. But maybe the tenant has other things on their mind. I'll give you a perfect example. I was working with a tenant one time. We'll call this tenant Billy. Billy owed us $1,500 in back due rent. And when I had the conversation with Billy, I called him up and said, hey, Billy, this is Nathan with XYZ organization. You're behind on your rent right now, $1,500. That's the reason for this call. What do we got to do in order to get this balance cleared up? Billy started going into a tirade about how we never fix anything and we don't care about any of our tenants. Well, I looked real quickly at Billy's work order history. There was never a work order called in for the items that he said. I said, let's have that conversation, Billy. I want to help you. I could totally see that you're behind, that these items need to be taken care of, but I don't see in the system where they've ever been called in before. Let's go ahead and get those items on a list and everything that needs to be done. So I wrote it all down and I read it back to Billy for Billy to verify that I had everything correct. And I asked Billy to send us some photos of the work while I was still on the call with him, and I made sure that I got those photos so I could verify with Billy that I had everything I needed in order to make sure that the work order was in the software system. Then I said to Billy, I'm going to get this scheduled with our maintenance team, and I'll let you know when it's going to be done. So I went ahead and scheduled the work order with the maintenance team, verified when that person was going to be coming out to the home to take care of the issues that Billy was saying, because none of them were emergency issues. And I said back to Billy, now that we have all of that done, let's talk about the $1,700 balance that's owed, or $1,500 balance that's owed. Let's not make it grow to $1,700 and $1,800. Let's get this taken care of right now. And so Billy was kind to have that conversation with me at that point. The roadblock was Billy thought I didn't care enough about the property. I didn't care about him enough. So why should he care about it? See, we're not talking about people who make sound financial decisions when they owe you money. You make sound financial decisions. That's why you own the real estate investment. But not every single person that you work with is going to be as astute with their money as you are. And so you have to learn to prioritize things and help them make good decisions. And you've got to show and lean in that you don't love the money. You want to help make sure that you're holding them accountable to the relationship that you guys have. You have a contractual relationship that you're going to provide services and housing, quality housing, and they're going to provide the rent. And so make sure that those two things are taken care of, and always separate those conversations. Have one conversation about the structural issues, the housing, the maintenance issues, or whatever else is going on in the home, and then come back to the money conversation and finish up the money conversation. Billy will thank you, and you'll thank yourself, because you'll end up that much richer just from doing the right things by other people. So now that we understand that we have to work the tenant through the scarcity and abundance conversation, we've got to help them understand the value and the asset that they have, and that we've got to work them through the fact that you care about them. Then you can start to put yourself in a position where you're actually going to collect money. Now, I want to talk a little bit about financial literacy, the importance of financial education, some basic principles, and that cash flow is so critical as a real estate investor. Okay, so that's the money mindset, that we have importance in financial education and literacy. As investors, we do this work. There's an importance in basic principles that you have to understand in finance. When you're collecting rent, let's talk about a past tenant, okay? Because you have done well to manage your finances and you own real estate, you understand that trickles of money, the larger you get, those small trickles become fortunes. And so it is best, if a tenant is going to owe you a balance, if you can establish the payment arrangement before the tenant leaves the property. Okay, so let's say they're going to owe you a bunch of money. See if you can get all of their updated contact information, where they're going. See if you can get from them their email addresses. See if you can get from them any of their future mailing address before the tenant moves out of the property. If you could do those things, which is really, really cool when it happens, you can then get the tenant set up on a payment arrangement. Remember, reiterating to them the value and the benefit of why they should be doing this, helping them to understand where they're going to get the money from, and not loving the money so much that you can't see past the balance that's owed to you, and ask, because this is a human being on the other side, what they can actually do and work with them with that process. If you can do those things effectively, then you can get the tenant set up on a payment arrangement sometimes before they move out of the property. And thus you're not trying to chase somebody down. They understand that you value the contractual relationship, but you're not going to put them in such a financial position going forward that they can't have a place to live. They can't put food on their table. They can't do all of the basic functions that somebody needs to do. And so you're going to set up a payment arrangement with them to the best of your ability before they move out of the property. Now, if you have to skip trace somebody, that's a different story. And there's a lot of different organizations that do collections work. So you might take an entire collections file, which is a copy of the lease, the balance that's owed to you and turn that over to collections afterwards. One of the things I highly recommend is make sure in your lease you allow for attorney fees and collection fees so that when you send that over to the collection agency, they can add that to the balance. That's just a pro tip for you. But when it comes to collections, you don't want to be the organization doing the skip tracing. You want to have a good collection agency that can do all of that kind of work for you. However, a good collection agency will first drive that person back into you. And if you have forwarding address, you can send letters of balances to those people and notifications that their balance will be turned over to collections if they don't reach back out to you and have the conversation. I want you to look at any number on your list. Okay, so when you're doing collections, you have a name, a phone number, and a balance that's owed to you. That should be on your list. Also, you should have a list of notes. What was said to this person in the previous conversations? You should know what's going on. So that when you reach out to somebody, let's say that they were a past tenant, you can have a direct conversation with them about what the charges are, why they were charged those things, and give yourself some grace and ability to work through negotiating that balance down as well. Think about this. If it's not in your lease, you're going to end up paying the collection agency upwards of 40% to collect that rent. If you get it in your head that it's okay to negotiate down past balances with tenants that move out up to 40%, then you can work through collecting money from that tenant in a way that you're confident that you could essentially forgive certain balances with the tenant. That's number one. But if you're not going to forgive balances with the tenant, then you really have got to have photographic evidence. You've got to have definitive documentation of before and after with the tenant that the damage was actually caused by them and the balances are actually owed. So the way that that works is before the tenant moves in, you do a pre-move-in checklist with the tenant to verify that when they moved in, all of the balance, all of the maintenance work and all the construction work was done and that there was no challenges with the property, so that when they damage the property upon move out and you have after photos, because you have before photos and a checklist, the after photos and the damage report you can give to the tenant and share with them why they were charged the certain charges they were charged. Be reasonable with this stuff, guys. If you don't have photos of before and after, you don't have what the property looked like, you don't have their contact information on the lease, you don't have the proper forms in place, you don't have all of these things in place in order to be able to protect you and the tenant and to be able to show the tenant that you care about them, then it's no wonder that people are not paying you the balances that are owed to you. So financial literacy is important. Back to my point. Financial literacy is important, and helping that tenant to understand by maintaining a payment arrangement with you for the balance that's owed, the past due resident for the balance that's owed, that they would then be able to get future apartments because the debt won't show on their collections report. And explaining that to somebody, that your credit report is going to be showing that you owe this balance and it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to get a place in the future. That's contractually what you asked me to do with this balance if you don't make this payment right now or get a payment arrangement established. So let's go ahead and just put that payment arrangement in place so we can at least find a place in the future. And as long as we know what that place is in the future that you're moving to, and we have a good payment arrangement and you make your payments on time, then we don't have to file with the collection agency who's going to put this particular balance on your credit report. And these types of things will help you to be able to collect more rent. Financial literacy and explaining that to them is imperative, and your ability to maintain these trickles of cash flow keep you tethered to receiving those payments. Now, if you can't do it full time, then you hire somebody that has an organization that can do these things full time, whether the tenant's living in the property, collecting rent property, or they're past and you're trying to collect rent. All right. So now that we've got those couple of mindset things in the bag, we understand scarcity, abundance. We understand the financial literacy conversation. We understand how to build value and how important it is to build value from the tenant's perspective on why they need to make the payment. We understand the values aligned spending concept. Okay. Nobody is going to give you money, mindless consumption for nothing. There has to be a tangible benefit in it for them. Okay. And so it is your responsibility to help the tenant understand that them paying you is in alignment with their core values. If you don't know what their core values are, then you didn't do a good enough job building relationship along the way. If you get to the point where they owe you money and you've never had a conversation with them, you've never worked with that tenant, and you don't have any documentation as to who they are, and they don't value the relationship with you, then you're having difficulties with being in alignment with their values. Maybe your communication platform is wrong. Maybe you're trying to email people and what they really needed was a phone call. You have to be in alignment with the values of the tenant. And so I highly recommend that you exercise all of your different options. You utilize phone calls, you utilize text messages, you utilize emails. One of the best collection notices I think I've ever had in my entire career was simply a small balance notice that said, hey, this is a friendly reminder that you still have an outstanding balance of $25. Could you please get this taken care of with your next month's rent? Ooh, you would imagine that simple balance notice gets the phone to ring off the hook because it's not aggressive, it's non-threatening, and it helps remind the person of the balance that's outstanding. We sent that out via email to our tenants, and we send a quick little text reminder just letting them know that the balance is outstanding if they could get that cleaned up on the 25th of every single month. Again, go back and watch my video Collecting Rent with Love, and you'll see exactly the philosophy and the thought process we have of when we send different notices and what we're sending and why we send those things. However, from this standpoint, I just want you to understand that it's got to be in alignment with their values. So they don't want to have a late fee next month. And so just having a friendly reminder puts that particular person who wants to pay you on time not in the mindset of being upset with you because they didn't know they still had an outstanding balance. And so these are things that I find that are just critical. Values-based spending is critical in the money mindset. We got just a couple more and then we'll wrap up, guys. Long-term vision. So looking at instant gratification versus long-term outcomes, and begin with the end in mind. So again, to collect on the back end, you have to have done the relationship correct on the front end. You got to know why the tenant wanted to move into that house. You have to understand what are the benefits and features of the home that they're moving into. You have to have the proper application. You've got to have the proper documentation up front that they've signed, that they understood that these balances are going to be owed at different times. All the way to the fact that if you're going to have utility charges, that it's documented in the ad for the home up front. So you can point back to the fact that they've known about the charges the entire time. This isn't news. It's not like you're surprising them with something, because if somebody's surprised by something inside of your process, your communication process, maybe it's just that you didn't communicate effectively with that person and now you've made them mad at you. Okay, so communicating properly, from thinking with the end in mind, if the end result is that you're going to have to collect rent from this person, then might it be wise that you set your business up from the very beginning to help the tenant understand the long-term ramifications of not following through on the agreements that they made with you, right? So just set it up from the very beginning, and that will really help you to be able to have a better relationship with your tenants. Diversification. Let's talk about diversification and not having all of your eggs in one basket for a second. This is the mindset that we want to communicate to the tenant as well. But the challenge is that the diversification is where they're going to get the money from. Okay. So if they're banking on getting somebody to give them money on Thursday, and they think that that's what's going to happen in order for them to help them get their rent caught up, you got to help them understand that maybe we should diversify that thought process a little bit and see if we can get some other organizations or other people involved in helping us to make sure that this rent is getting taken care of. Because if they're not giving you the money today, then there's a chance that on Thursday that money is not going to come through. So when you sign your payment arrangement with the tenant so that they can extend without being filed upon from the attorney, you might have to ask them some questions. Where's this money coming from on Wednesday next week? So that you have a better understanding. All right. And then mindfulness and gratitude. Mindfulness and gratitude. This is more a reminder for you, the investor, to be grateful and thankful when the tenants do make their payment. Be thankful and grateful for the payment. I put this in here because, you know, it's like the Lion King, Hakuna Matata, right? It means no worries for the rest of your days. It's a problem-free philosophy, right? Hakuna Matata. If you are constantly ungrateful for your tenants and for their payments, they're going to feel that. If you are constantly ungrateful for your tenants and their payment, they're going to feel that. And so gratitude is a major part of being able to have the right mindset between you and the tenant to be able to collect rent. If they feel a sense of gratitude from you, a thankfulness, then they're going to be that much more likely to pay you again and again and again in the future. But you have to be open to listening to them. And then last but not least, self-worth. Self-worth. Your value as a person. Here's the thing about self-worth. Remind the tenant that they're worth it. Remind the tenant that they're valuable. That even if things don't work out the way that everybody wants them to and they get their balance paid on Thursday, they're still important and they still matter. Because if you can get them to believe that they're worth it, then they will come up with the money to be able to pay you the balance that's owed. But if they feel that you think they're not worth it, then their self-image diminishes and their personal value goes down and their ability to come up with the funds and the resources diminishes significantly. They put less effort in because they don't see value in themselves because you didn't see value in them. And so self-worth matters when it comes to collecting rent from current tenants or previous tenants. How might that sound? Well, I'm glad you asked. I had a tenant, we'll call her Brenda. Brenda was a single mom with 2 children. And she, for whatever reason, fell behind on her rent. Her job was still paying her. She made plenty of money. In fact, whenever I checked with her, she was still making $3,300 a month and her rent was $1,000. So she clearly could come up with the money. The problem was she was prioritizing the money on all of these different items. I simply reminded Brenda that she's worth it, that her credit's worth it, that her future is worth it, for her to get her rent straightened back out, for her to get me caught up, and for her to be able to live in a home that's as nice as the one that she was living in. She's worth it. So why not invest in yourself and make sure you get your rent caught up? I asked her how she was going to take care of the initial payment for the promissory note. She told me that she had a credit card. I collected $1,000 on the credit card. And then I told her that we needed to get the remaining balance caught up in 5 more days, which was when she got paid again. And then we needed to get it straightened out for the following month. And Brenda paid it, understanding that she's worth it, that having her house paid for without being behind on this balance, that she's worthy of being a person that doesn't have to be behind on her rent. And she cared. She cared enough. I cared enough. And that was that. We had a tenant one time that moved out of a property and she was looking to go to a different property. Because we had a judgment against her, she owed us like $2,300. This tenant was a nuisance. She was a problem. She didn't get along with a lot of people. She's manipulative. She was a liar. These are facts. I'm not trying to belittle or belate the point, but she owed the money. And I had a conversation with her about her balances and asked her if she could get all of her balances caught up because she wanted to move into a new property. Now, this particular tenant She tried to bring in some money one time, and then she came back because she didn't have the full balance. And then, long story short, she brought in her $2,300 and got a release for the judgment with the attorney. Now, the problem is that while she got the release from us so that she can move into her new place, she still had this balance outstanding on her credit. When you show the courts that a balance is satisfied, like somebody that owed you a previous judgment, they can come in and bring that balance down to zero, but there's still judgments that are on their credit and they stay there. And so in Missouri, it's important to understand that when you're collecting rent, if the tenant is still in the property, you can file the writ and take any amount of money all the way up until the sheriff comes and sets the tenant out. Once the tenant is moved out of the property and you're collecting rent from them, there's no additional leverage if the tenant bounces money to you, brings you certified funds that aren't really certified, sends you some manipulation. So if you send something over to the courts to show as satisfied and the balance still goes to zero, let's say that money was to bounce. The money order was no good. It was fake. The tenant is still going to show that they have a balance outstanding to the court. So my point to you with this entire story is that you can give the tenant what they need and still maintain the leverage of the balance, even in the event that the tenant is trying to manipulate you, because you care about the resident. So hold them accountable to what you say you're going to do. But if you tell them you're going to do something, do it. Show the judgment is satisfied. Care about the person. Give them the receipt that's owed to them. Let them take it to their new apartment community and pay it off. If you have your money and it's cleared up and your balance is at zero, legitimately, then give the tenant what they need on their side, because that's what they're asking for in the negotiation. There's value that you have that they're exchanging their dollar bills for in order to get the life that they want. And you just have to remember that when you're talking about collections. I hope this information was helpful for you. I hope it doesn't leave anything left to wonder about collecting rent, because collecting rent is a critical piece, and having the right mindset when you collect rent is that much more important. And that, Renovation Nation, brings us to the end of another episode. I'm Nathan Bush, your guide on this journey of real estate business growth. Remember, just like plants need the right air, soil, and care, our minds need the right environment to build a life of purpose, passion, and growth. Don't forget to get your citizenship to Mind Renovation Nation. Here's how you do it. Subscribe to my email list. Go over to www.nathanbushmba.com and subscribe to the email list. Then subscribe to the YouTube channel. This will keep you up to date with the latest episodes. Then the last way to get your citizenship is to share the show with a friend who's as excited about business growth as you are, so that they can join us every Friday at noon. So then join me next time for more insights, inspiration, and of course, a little bit of that nation building spirit that drives us to create a community united by shared value, a purpose, and a commitment to leaving a lasting legacy. Until then, keep building, keep growing, and let's lead more than 25,000 souls to a life of values-based investing. In our journey of mind renovation, we often talk about personal growth, ethical leadership, and making impactful choices. Values-based investing is an extension of that philosophy. It's about being a steward not only of our finances, but of our values and vision for the future. I'm signing off now from the heart of St. Louis. Stay blessed, stay inspired, and remember, every day is a chance to renovate your nation.